Welcome to another training series. This time I have Will Taylor, who is the co-founder of Grow United. We're going to be talking about Grow United. We're going to be talking about the Grow blockchain, all things Grow. But before we start, Will, give us a quick introduction, and maybe for somebody who this is their first time learning about Grow and everything around that. Give us like an elevator pitch of what Grow United is.
Amazing. So our goal is to nourish people, animals, and the planet and leverage blockchain to do that. So I got into this because when I graduated school, I had been an athlete and I loved health and fitness, and that led me into a career in the gym space. And so I bought a gym, and then I bought another gym, and I was training people to get healthier, lose weight, live healthy, vibrant lives. And I realized in doing that food, both the quantity and quality of food, was the biggest thing that moved the lever in that. And so I started helping a lot of people with their food. And at that same time, my college roommate and best friend was a sixth generation farmer out of Washington State in the US. And he called me, and I actually helped him lose a little weight, get shredded. And he realized, man, I'm eating all of my food. I think we're growing the best food on the planet. We're using these amazing regenerative farming practices, and nobody knows. And so he asked me, can we build an app that can help track and trace everything that we're doing, track it to the end consumer, and say, hey, if you eat good quality food that was grown this way, not only are we nourishing you and helping you live the healthiest life that you can, but we're also nourishing the animals and the plants that we're growing, and in turn, nourishing the soil, the atmosphere, and the earth around us. And so that led us on a journey to build an app called Farm Tracer that does exactly what I just said, which is track and trace food, and then move into how do we leverage blockchain technology to take that even further. So in short, we build products and then leverage the blockchain to nourish people, animals, and the planet in the best way possible.
Talk through kind of the evolution of the production of food. How have things changed over the past, I don't know how many years you want to put on it, but how is food production different today than the way that maybe our grandparents or great grandparents used to eat?
Amazing question. So if you look back, let's go back 150, 200 years, and basically until every time up to that point, there wasn't global trade like there is now. There wasn't airplanes. There wasn't the ability to cargo ship things across the world. And so you generally knew where your food was coming from. It could spoil because you didn't have refrigerators. And so you were eating farm fresh organic food, for lack of better words. And you knew where your food was coming from because you either grew it or killed it yourself, or you were getting it from the local farmer. Well, after World War II, when you looked at food production and you also see a huge growth in commercialism, you have the centralization of food. And so if you look at how things are right now, essentially 10 major public corporations run the entire food and ag economy. And when you came out of World War II, that was helpful because you started to get the supply chain moving, global trade, and getting food all over the world, feeding more people, which is a positive thing. But what has happened over time from that is kind of a couple major things. One, we've gone away from real food. And so if you ever question kind of what I'm saying here, just go to the grocery store, go to one of the middle aisles, pull off a bag or a box, and look at all of the ingredients that are in that piece of food that you're eating. And I can bet you that you have no idea what 95% of the things that are actually on that label are. So that's one. We've gone away from eating real food. And in my opinion, that's a big cause to the chronic disease epidemics that we have right now and just our overall health globally. The other side to that is the producers, the farmers that are actually creating and growing and putting in the blood, sweat, and tears behind food. They no longer get the credit, both in us knowing where our food comes from and the financial incentives to grow. There's a bunch of middle market players now. We're really driving for profits for these public corporations at the cost of Are we providing nourishing food? Are we using practices that nourish the soil and the planet that we live on? Are we treating the plants and animals that we're growing in the best human way possible, right? Are we treating them as we would like to be treated? And we think there's a lot of issues in that. And that has really all happened since coming out of World War II. And so when we look at it, we look at going back, taking the best of the past, and then combining it with the best of the future, which is blockchain technology. And bringing those two together, we think can help solve a lot of the problems that currently exist.
So, what are the problems? Like, give me some specifics of how out of touch we are with what we're actually eating. Like, what would I be disgusted to realize is actually in my food?
That's a good question. So let's start with this. And think about I've presented about our projects many times to thousands of people, and I always do what I call now the grow bet. And so I have everybody close their eyes and think about the last 24 hours and think about the food that you've eaten. And I have them raise their hand and say, okay, raise your hand. Now keep your hand raised if you can tell me where everything came from and how it was grown that you've eaten or drank in the last 24 hours. Well, usually 99% of the room goes down at that point. I've had a couple people make it to 48, and I had one guy make it to the 72-hour mark, but he hadn't eaten in 72 hours, so he was just doing a prolonged fast, so he didn't really count. But that kind of illuminates the first problem is we don't know the source of our food. We don't know what's gone into it. We don't know where it came from. And so we can help solve that problem, which then starts to illuminate some of the other problems. And so when you look at how we raise and treat animals in particular, crowding them into these really small places, feeding them with growth hormone just to get them as big as possible in as short amount of time as possible, it's pretty sickening when you look at some of the ways that we treat these animals. The other side, and one that I think we don't see a lot, is what we're doing to our soil. So when you look at the earth being our home for all of us, when you look at monocropping or massive tilling or what it takes to just kind of produce food at the highest rate possible, and that's the number one factor, you're not regenerating the soil with the nutrients that it needs. And so it would be like taking a human or us and saying, okay, the only thing you're going to eat for the next 5 years is broccoli. That's it. Like all you can eat is broccoli. And that means I'm going to get a lot of the nutrients that come from broccoli, but I'm going to miss out on my protein, my fat, the micronutrients that come from an array of different minerals and micronutrients that come from food. Well, we're doing that to our soil. And so what it takes to grow corn is a specific array of nutrients that then get sucked in from the corn to the soil, and we don't put that back in. And so then that piece of land gets very barren. You actually have to take years off, and then you can try it again. And that has led to us and the agriculture space looking at how do we cover those symptoms. So how can I try and pump those nutrients back into the soil without actually regenerating it in the normal way that it should be done? And so those are just some examples that get us to where seeing a bigger picture in some of the issues that exist.
Okay, which obviously results in poorer quality of food. And I know from when I've spoken to you before that your goal is to make positive change. But in order to make that positive change, in order for farmers and agricultural practices to change, it's got to be driven from the customer, the consumer. What trends are you seeing in the consumer demand for a better product?
Amazing question. So one, if you just look at some trends that are really going right now, like the homesteading trend or grow your own food is really moving very quickly. Some of the biggest YouTube channels growing right now are all about teaching us how to, whether you're on 1 acre, half an acre, an apartment in New York City, or you got 40 acres somewhere in the world, how can you create sovereignty around your food sources and where that comes from? And we love that. We love people wanting to know. And I know sometimes I get to be a broken record of like what it's like to know where our food comes from. But that really is the foundation of it. Because once you know, then you can start tweaking how. right? Because if you have no idea and we're uneducated and we just put a blindfold on and start shoving things in our mouths, then we don't really know and we don't even know the questions to ask. So really the foundation to just ask is, do I know where this came from? And then that sets you down, okay, well, how was it grown? Why was it grown? What's actually inside of it? And then solving all of the deeper rooted problems within it.
You had told me a story about a stadium that was requiring a better product. Can you just tell me that, or tell our viewers that
Yes.
story?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great story. And this was when we started to get some momentum. So when I had mentioned earlier my good friend that's a sixth generation farmer, when he called me and said, hey, I want to track and trace everything that's happening, we did that. And we spent years building the software and pulling in the data and doing all the things you do as a young startup. And we were starting to get some momentum. But then Amazon came along. So Amazon, one of the biggest companies in the world right now, and they bought a really big arena where the NBA team, the Supersonics, used to play. And when they bought it, they could have named it Amazon Arena, but instead they named it Climate Pledge Arena. And with that, they built a lot of stipulations around how that arena would function, and particularly the food that would be allowed in the concessions to be sold and eaten inside of the arena. And so there were a lot of them, like they had to be grown within a certain area, regeneratively grown, have carbon neutrality within it. And the head chef really wanted there to be beef. And there was no beef that met those stipulations until they met Royal Ranch and Farm Tracer, where Farm Tracer, this software that tracked and traced everything, could prove and show to both them and the end consumer how that beef was grown, where it was born, how it was grown, what those cows were eating down to the half of a pound, and then all of the inputs that went around raising those beef and butchering those beef in the best ways that we know how. And so that led to a contract with the beef being able to be accepted, purchased, and an annual contract written with the Climate Pledge Arena, where the only beef in the arena actually comes from Royal Ranch. And so that was a really, really big win for us because it showed us a couple of things. One, that the end consumer, the people that are going to see the NHL games and the concerts and the things, want to know where their food is coming from because they were scanning the QR codes that were in there. And then also that the ranch and the producers could make more money by actually giving up their transparency into their inputs, which was a really, really cool win.
Yeah, it's a great story. So let's talk about specifically, how does blockchain tie into everything that we've been speaking about? How is blockchain going to help you in your mission to improve the quality of the foods that we eat?
So when we were building Farm Tracer, we were just a normal company, and we were running it and we were trying to grow it. And then we realized there's a better way to do this. And I mentioned one of the big problems in the space was centralization of large corporations. And so when you look at blockchain, one of the things around it is decentralization, giving the power to the users. And so we realized that as co-founders of these businesses, if we kept that control, that we wouldn't actually get to where we wanted to go. We would just end up as another corporation in this space. And so what we did is we came to blockchain and we were able to help get a blockchain up and going and then decentralize the projects that we were building into the blockchain and give that power to the users ourselves as node owners and anyone watching this as a possible node owner of Grow, that we get to be the community in there, and that it's not about driving massive profits for just a centralized corporation for a few, but actually being aligned with the mission and the vision to nourish people, animals, and the planet. So that was the first piece, is that blockchain would allow true decentralization. Then on top of that, the beauty of immutability, anonymity, and tracking and tracing on the blockchain, which has led us to be able to take following that cow's life, not just in a web-based application that could be hacked by any decent hacker, but actually running it and following it through the entire life cycle in an immutable blockchain and seeing all of it and having it transparent. One thing that this solves, which has been really amazing for us, is just data ownership and data transparency and anonymity. Very, very few farmers in the world want to give their data to any centralized government or centralized organization. And when I look at where are the most biased, lobbied organizations or niches in the world, food is one of those, right? And so how I think about this is you've got people that are on certain types of diets. A person that could be carnivore over here, paleo over here, low carb, high carb, vegetarian, vegan, put them all in the same room, and they'd probably all stand on a soapbox and yell at each other about who's right and what's best. And we know some things, and there's principles within that. But when you put all of that data into a blockchain and then just start following it over time, you can actually see what is the best and how it goes. And that's the same for food. How we grow food in the basin of Washington State in the United States is very different than how we would grow in Africa or Australia. But as we start putting in the data and start looking at it, we can see what is the best, what grows the best over here, what grows the best over here, what inputs can we use, and then doing all of that behind proofs of identity, behind passkeys that still allows the users or the producers to have control of access to, do I want people to know who we are, yes or no? But the data is now there for us to see and use as a community to see what actually is best. And so that's a really cool use case that we get really excited about.
Yeah. Um, let's play for just a second. Imagine, I don't know, it's the future. Let's not specify when in the future. I go into a grocery store. I go into a restaurant. I get online to order some food. How do you see me interacting with the Grow blockchain in any of those scenarios?
Beautiful. So this exists today. So actually, my parents live in South Korea most of the time right now, and they were visiting my sister in Oregon. And I got a picture from my mom of the menu at the restaurant that they were at in Oregon. And on that menu was a QR code because all of the beef and some of the potatoes in the restaurant were part of our partner farms in Farm Tracer. And so one of the use cases is they went to the restaurant, they bought the high-end steak, and they clicked on that QR code, and it pulled up right on their phone all of the information about that steak, as well as a video about the rancher that had grown that beef. And so as they were waiting for their steak before it came and they eat it, they got to learn where it came from. And which was, I think it's cool because it gives us some gratitude, of this is what I know. I know that this is where it came from. It allows us to see it and not just be so mindless about what we eat and how we go about our day-to-day life. So that's a very real life example that exists today.
So I love that example. Obviously, not everyone is going to scan that QR code and watch that video and trace it back. But what are you hoping that does to the practices? I mean, transparency shines a light everywhere and makes, I'm assuming, people improve their practices. What do you think will, or what do you hope will happen because of that transparency?
One is, I like what you said, that as you provide transparency, I think there's actually some really good science around when you just start measuring something, things move in a positive direction. So it's like weight loss.
Right.
If you know you want to lose weight and the only thing you do is you weigh yourself every morning, then like science shows it's going to start moving in the right direction, right? There's some really good studies, right, that'll follow that. So one is, as we start being more transparent, I think things naturally will start to move in a direction because you can't hide behind it. And also, what we have seen is that as you start collecting this data, as you provide transparency, it creates incentives to do it well. So the first incentive is, okay, we as consumers will be willing to pay just a little bit more to know where our food came from, that it's healthy. That's a small one, right?
Yes.
But also, as a producer, if I'm tracking and tracing, there are other incentives. And when I said the vision at the beginning, it's not just about nourishing us as people. It's nourishing the plants, the animals, and the world. And so there's something called carbon credits right now. So where a carbon credit is essentially, you could sequester carbon from the air, hold it in a natural sink, and regenerative farming is one of the best ways to do that in many different ways inside of the regenerative farming umbrella.
Right, and we'll get a lot deeper into that in our next video, but I'm glad you reminded us of that.
Perfect. So we dive into that and say, okay, because we're tracing, we can now have these credits that can then become another vertical for the producer. And so it gets much deeper than that, but it's cool because you have to have transparency and a data collection first before you can even start diving into that. And so it leads to a lot of possibilities of what can happen in the future once we have the base foundation of that.
Final question for our Connect affiliates that are watching this that may already be running nodes or thinking about purchasing a node to run. Just tie in everything that we've spoken about to how important that node is for everything that we've discussed to even be possible.
Without a node, the blockchain cannot run and be decentralized. And so the community of the blockchain is built on the backs of node owners that have active nodes. And so those nodes act as a server and data processor to confirm positive actions on the blockchain. So as we scan a QR code, this data that I've talked about that creates transparency, it has to go through something. And so it goes through those nodes to get on the blockchain. And then as a reward for running that and being a part of that process, then there's a grow reward that is distributed every single day to those active nodes that can then be used inside of grow projects. And so in exchange for food or bridged into the crypto space. But without those nodes, we don't have a decentralized blockchain.
Well, I think that was a great overview of this first section. We're going to be back shortly where we talk about some of the other things, some of the exciting projects that Grow United is working on in addition. So thanks for your time.